hidden beneath the surface of almost every avoidant is a secret that most people never discover. The strange part is that the harder someone tries to win an avoidant's love, the less likely they are to receive it. For years, relationship advice has told people to be more patient, more understanding, more available, and more willing to prove their devotion. Yet countless people find themselves trapped in the same painful cycle. They give everything they have. They offer loyalty, attention, reassurance, and endless chances. But the avoidant keeps pulling away. The distance grows, the confusion grows, and the question remains the same. Why does someone who clearly cares seem so determined to create space? What makes this mystery even more fascinating is that avoidants do not behave this way with everyone. Occasionally, a specific person enters their life and everything, clears throat, changes. The avoidant who once seemed emotionally unavailable suddenly becomes attentive. The person who avoided deep conversation starts opening up. The individual who valued distance above all else begins moving closer. To outsiders, it can look completely irrational. It can even feel unfair. After all, why would an avoidant reject someone willing to do anything for them, yet become deeply attached to someone else? The answer has very little to do with beauty, status, money, or luck. It has everything to do with psychology. Deep within the avoidant mind are fears, defense mechanisms, and emotional patterns that most people never recognize. These hidden forces quietly shape who they pursue, who they run from, and who they ultimately struggle to forget. The truth is that avoidants are often drawn toward a very specific type of person, not the person most people expect. Not the person constantly chasing them. Not the person sacrificing everything to keep the relationship alive. The person they fall hardest for is usually the one who triggers emotions they cannot easily manage, predict, or control. In this video, we are going to uncover exactly who that person is and why avoidance becomes so deeply affected by them. We will explore the surprising psychological traits that create attraction inside the avoidant mind. We will reveal why chasing often pushes them further away, why emotional independence creates powerful attraction, and why some people remain unforgettable long after a relationship ends. We will also uncover lesser-known truths about avoidant attachment that many relationship experts rarely discuss. Most importantly, by the end of this video, you will understand the difference between the people avoidants appreciate and the people they genuinely struggle to stop thinking about. Stay with us until the end, because the final insight may completely change the way you view avoidance, relationships, and attraction itself. If you are ready to uncover the psychology behind who avoidants truly fall in love with, welcome to the channel. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's begin. One of the biggest misunderstandings about avoidance is the belief that they are incapable of love. People see the distance, the silence, the mixed signals, and the emotional walls, and they immediately assume there must be a lack of feelings underneath. It seems logical. After all, when someone truly cares, shouldn't they move closer? Shouldn't they communicate more? Shouldn't they fight to keep the relationship alive? But avoidant attachment rarely follows the rules most people expect. The truth is that many avoidants do not fear love itself. What they fear is what love might require from them. They fear dependence. They fear vulnerability. They fear the possibility of needing another person more than they need themselves. To most people, emotional closeness feels comforting. To an avoidant, emotional closeness can sometimes feel dangerous. The deeper the connection becomes, the more exposed they feel. The more exposed they feel, the more their instincts tell them to create distance. This is why an avoidant can genuinely care about someone and still pull away at the exact moment the relationship seems to be getting stronger. To the other person, this behavior feels confusing. One week, the avoidant seems warm, engaged, and invested. The next week, they seem distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. Many people interpret this change as proof that the avoidant never cared, but often the opposite is true. Sometimes the relationship became important enough to trigger fear. This fear is rarely obvious. Most avoidants do not wake up and consciously think, I am afraid of intimacy. Instead, the fear hides behind practical excuses. They tell themselves they need more space. They convince themselves the relationship is moving too fast. They focus on small flaws that suddenly seem impossible to ignore. They become busy. They immerse themselves in work. They spend more time alone. From the outside, it looks like they're losing interest. Internally, however, they may be struggling with emotions they do not fully understand. The closer someone gets to them, the more vulnerable they feel. The more vulnerable they feel, the more they crave distance. This cycle creates one of the most frustrating experiences in modern relationships because both people are often reacting to fear in completely different ways. The anxious partner moves closer because they fear losing connection. The avoidant moves away because they fear losing independence. Both people are trying to protect themselves, yet their strategies push them further apart. What makes this even more complicated is that avoidants often value love very deeply. Many of them secretly want the same things everyone else wants. They want connection, they want understanding, they want loyalty, they want acceptance. The difference is that they have learned to associate emotional dependence with risk. Somewhere in their emotional development, they learned that relying too much on others could lead to disappointment, loss, rejection, or pain. As a result, self-sufficiency became their safety net. Independence became their shield. Even when they enter relationships, that shield rarely disappears completely. It remains in the background, waiting for signs that emotional closeness is becoming too intense. This is where another common misunderstanding begins. Many people believe the solution is to love the avoidant harder. They become more available, more patient, more understanding. They try to prove they are different from everyone who came before. They give extra reassurance. They offer endless support. They make sacrifices. They ignore their own needs. They believe that enough love will eventually convince the avoidant to feel safe. While these actions often come from a genuine place, they sometimes create the opposite effect. The avoidant begins to feel overwhelmed, not because the love is bad, but because the intensity feels difficult to manage. Instead of feeling free to move toward the relationship, they start feeling pressure. Even if that pressure was never intended, this brings us to the person avoidants often fall hardest for. Surprisingly, it is rarely the person who spends every moment trying to earn their affection. It is rarely the person who constantly chases them. It is rarely the person who abandons their own life to keep the relationship alive. The person who tends to affect an avoidant most deeply possesses a very different set of qualities. This person values connection, but does not chase. They are warm, but not desperate. They are loving, but not controlling. They are emotionally available without making the relationship the center of their entire existence. They care deeply, yet they remain connected to their own goals, friendships, interests, and purpose. At first glance, this may not seem significant, but from the perspective of an avoidant, it changes everything. One of their deepest fears is becoming trapped inside someone else's emotional needs. When they meet a person who appears emotionally self-sufficient, their defenses often remain lower. They do not feel immediate pressure. They do not feel responsible for managing another person's happiness. They do not feel like every moment of distance will create a crisis. Instead, they experience something they rarely associate with relationships. They experience freedom. Freedom is an extremely important word here because most people underestimate its role in avoidant attraction. Many avoidants do not move closer when they feel pressure. They move closer when they feel safe. Safety for them often comes from knowing they still have room to breathe. They still have room to think. They still have room to be themselves. When a relationship allows that space, emotional walls become less necessary. The avoidant no longer feels forced to protect their independence because their independence is not under threat. This is why the person they fall hardest for is often someone who maintains healthy boundaries. Boundaries communicate a powerful message. They say, I care about you, but I also care about myself. That message feels very different from dependency. An avoidant may unconsciously respect this more than they can explain. They recognize self-respect. They recognize emotional stability. These qualities create an environment where attraction can develop naturally rather than through pressure. Many people assume attraction grows through constant pursuit. In some situations, that may be true. But with avoidance, excessive pursuit often activates old defense mechanisms. Every text that demands reassurance, every conversation that seeks immediate certainty, every attempt to force emotional closeness before they are ready can trigger their instinct to retreat. This does not mean communication is wrong. It does not mean expressing needs is wrong. It simply means that avoidants often interpret intensity differently than other people. What feels like love to one person can feel like pressure to another. As pressure increases, the avoidance internal alarm system begins to activate. They start focusing on escape routes. They become less present. They withdraw emotionally. Sometimes they withdraw physically as well. The tragic part is that the pursuing partner often responds by chasing even harder. They notice the distance and try to close the gap. They ask for more reassurance. They seek more connection. They invest even more energy into the relationship. Unfortunately, this can create a cycle where each person's attempt to solve the problem actually makes the problem worse. The avoidant feels pressure and pulls away. The other person senses distance and moves closer. The avoidant feels even more pressure and retreats further. Neither person intends to create conflict, yet both become trapped in a pattern that feeds itself. Over time, frustration grows on both sides. One person feels abandoned. The other feels overwhelmed. What started as attraction slowly becomes tension. Now consider a different scenario. Instead of chasing, the other person remains grounded. They communicate openly. They express interests. They show affection, but they do not make their entire emotional world dependent on the avoidance response. They continue living their life. They maintain friendships. They pursue goals. They protect their boundaries. Suddenly, the avoidant is interacting with a completely different dynamic. There is connection without pressure, interest without desperation, closeness without control. This is often where attraction begins to deepen. The avoidant starts feeling curious. They start paying attention. They start wondering why this person feels different. There is no emotional chasing, no constant need for validation, no attempt to force outcomes. Instead, there is quiet confidence. There is self-respect. There is emotional balance. That balance introduces one of the most powerful forces in human attraction, scarcity. Not artificial scarcity created through manipulation, not games designed to trigger insecurity, genuine scarcity created by a person who values their own life. This distinction matters because manipulation eventually destroys trust. Genuine self-respect creates trust. The person who becomes unforgettable is not pretending to be unavailable. They are genuinely fulfilled outside the relationship. Their happiness does not depend entirely on one person. This creates a fascinating shift inside the avoidant mind. For perhaps the first time they encounter someone who wants them but does not need them, the difference is enormous. Wanting someone feels voluntary. Needing someone can feel overwhelming. When an avoidant senses that another person's identity remains intact, regardless of the relationship, they often feel safer investing emotionally. There is less fear of becoming responsible for someone else's emotional survival. There is less fear of losing their freedom. As this dynamic develops, respect begins to grow alongside attraction. The avoidant notices that this person does not abandon themselves for love. They notice that boundaries remain consistent. They notice that affection is given freely rather than used as a bargaining tool. They notice that the relationship enhances the person's life, but does not define it completely. These observations may seem small, but they carry tremendous psychological weight. Curiosity often follows. Human beings are naturally drawn toward people who possess qualities they admire. For avoidants, emotional independence can be one of those qualities. They may not consciously think about it. They may not even recognize it immediately, but they feel its impact. The relationship feels lighter, safer, more sustainable. Instead of triggering fears about losing control, it creates opportunities for genuine connection. Gradually, the avoidant begins lowering defenses they normally keep locked in place. Conversations become deeper, vulnerability becomes slightly easier, emotional investment grows. The walls that once seemed impossible to penetrate begin showing small openings. Not because someone forced them down, but because the avoidant no longer feels compelled to keep them so high. The relationship has become a space where connection and freedom can exist together. And for an avoidant, that combination can be incredibly powerful. One of the most fascinating things about avoidance is that when they truly fall in love, the transformation rarely looks dramatic from the outside. There is usually no sudden declaration, no overnight personality change, no moment where every wall instantly disappears. In fact, many people miss the signs completely because they are looking for obvious displays of affection. What actually happens is much quieter, much slower, much more subtle. An avoidant genuinely falls in love begins doing things they normally resist. They start lowering walls that have protected them for years. Not all at once, not perfectly, but little by little a conversation becomes slightly deeper than usual. A personal story they never share suddenly comes out. A fear they normally keep hidden gets mentioned. A struggle they would usually handle alone becomes something they are willing to discuss. To most people, these moments may seem small. To an avoidant, they are enormous. Every piece of vulnerability feels like a risk. Every emotional disclosure feels like stepping into unknown territory. This is why understanding avoidance requires paying attention to small changes rather than grand gestures. Many avoidants spend years building an identity around self-sufficiency. They become accustomed to handling problems alone. They learn to process emotions privately. They rely on themselves for comfort, solutions, and stability. Because of this, allowing another person into their inner world can feel deeply uncomfortable at first. Yet when real love develops, this process slowly begins. The avoidant starts making room for someone else in places that were once reserved only for themselves. They begin sharing thoughts before they have fully processed them. They ask for opinions. They seek support. They become more transparent about their daily lives. The private world that once felt locked away starts opening. Even if only a little at a time, this shift often surprises the avoidant themselves. For years, they may have believed that independence was their greatest strength. Then suddenly there is another person whose presence matters, another person whose opinion carries weight, another person they genuinely miss when they are absent. These feelings can be confusing because they challenge beliefs the avoidant has relied on for a long time. The desire for closeness begins competing with the desire for independence. Part of them wants connection, another part wants safety. Part of them wants to move closer, another part wants to maintain distance. This internal conflict explains why avoidants can sometimes appear inconsistent even when they are deeply invested. One day they may seem emotionally open. The next day they may become quieter. One week they may actively pursue connection. The following week they may need more space. To someone unfamiliar with avoidant attachment, this behavior can feel frustrating, but often it reflects an internal struggle rather than a lack of feelings. The avoidant is learning how to remain connected without feeling overwhelmed. They are learning how to trust without losing themselves. They are learning how to love without feeling trapped. As love grows, another important change begins to appear. The avoidant starts thinking about the relationship in ways they never expected. They begin considering another person's needs alongside their own. They start making plans that include someone else. They become more willing to compromise. They become more willing to communicate. These changes may seem normal to many people, but for an avoidant, they represent a significant shift. They are moving from complete emotional self-reliance toward shared emotional investment. That transition is not easy. It requires trust. It requires courage. Most importantly, it requires vulnerability. Vulnerability is the hidden challenge behind every stage of this process. Many people assume vulnerability simply means sharing emotions. In reality, vulnerability is much deeper. It means allowing another person to matter. It means accepting the possibility of disappointment. It means acknowledging that someone has the power to hurt you because they have become important to you. For an avoidant, this realization can feel frightening. The more they care, the more vulnerable they become. The more vulnerable they become, the more they risk emotional pain. This is why genuine love often activates both attraction and fear at the same time. Yet when the relationship feels safe enough, the avoidant continues moving forward despite that fear. They begin initiating contact more often. They start sharing experiences they would normally keep to themselves. They become more interested in emotional conversations. They allow another person access to parts of their life that were previously protected. These changes happen quietly. There may never be a dramatic announcement. There may never be a clear moment when everything changes. Instead, the transformation unfolds through hundreds of small choices. A little more openness, a little more trust, a little more emotional availability. Ironically, the people who inspire these changes are usually not the people trying hardest to make them happen. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of avoidant attraction. Many people believe they can love an avoidant into healing. They believe enough patience, enough sacrifice, and enough effort will eventually break through every wall. While support and understanding are valuable, avoidants are often most drawn to people who are not focused on fixing them. The people they admire most are rarely acting as rescuers. They are not trying to become therapists. They are not constantly analyzing every behavior. They are not spending every day searching for ways to heal the avoidant's past wounds. Instead, they are living their own lives. They are pursuing their goals. They are protecting their boundaries. They are taking responsibility for their own happiness. This creates a completely different dynamic. The avoidant does not feel like a project. They do not feel judged. They do not feel pressured to become someone else. They simply feel accepted. That acceptance can be incredibly powerful because it removes one of the biggest sources of relationship anxiety. The avoidant no longer feels like they are constantly being evaluated or pushed toward change. Authenticity plays a major role here. Avoidants often respect people who are comfortable being themselves. Not perfect, not flawless, just genuine. Authentic people do not chase approval at any cost. They do not abandon their values to keep someone interested. They do not shape their entire identity around another person's expectations. They know who they are. They know what they need. They know what they will and will not tolerate. This level of self-respect creates a sense of stability that many avoidants find deeply attractive. The reason is simple. Authenticity feels safe. When someone is genuine, there is less pressure to perform, less pressure to manage appearances, less pressure to meet impossible expectations. The relationship becomes a space where both people can simply exist as themselves. For an avoidant who has spent years protecting their independence, this kind of environment can feel surprisingly comforting. Boundaries contribute to this sense of safety as well. Many people misunderstand boundaries and assume they create distance. Healthy boundaries actually create trust. They clarify expectations. They protect individuality. They prevent resentment. When an avoidant encounters someone with strong boundaries, they often experience relief rather than rejection. They know where they stand. They know the relationship is not built on dependency. They know both people are capable of maintaining their own identity. This creates a unique form of attraction. The avoidant begins respecting the other person's emotional strength. They admire the fact that this person can love deeply without losing themselves. They admire the fact that affection is offered freely rather than demanded. They admire the fact that the relationship enhances life rather than becoming life itself. These qualities make the connection feel sustainable. Instead of triggering fears about being controlled, they create confidence in the future of the relationship. Over time, this confidence becomes magnetic. The avoidant starts lowering defenses because there is no longer a reason to keep them so high. They stop expecting pressure around every corner. They stop preparing for emotional demands that never arrive. They stop viewing closeness as a threat. Slowly, they begin associating connection with safety instead of obligation. This realization leads to one of the most emotional truths in avoidant relationships. Many people spend years trying to prove their worth to someone who keeps pulling away. They work harder, they love harder, they sacrifice more. They become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. They convince themselves that if they just give a little more, eventually everything will change. Every time distance appears, they respond by investing even more energy. Every time uncertainty appears, they try even harder to create certainty. At first, this seems reasonable. Most people are taught that love requires effort, commitment, persistence, dedication, and those things do matter, but sometimes effort turns into overcompensation. Sometimes dedication turns into self-abandonment. Sometimes persistence turns into chasing. Without realizing it, people begin sacrificing their own well-being in an attempt to secure another person's affection. The heartbreaking part is that the avoidant often never asked for these sacrifices. In many cases, the pressure was created by fear. Fear of losing the relationship, fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind. The person trying hardest believes they are strengthening the connection while the avoidant experiences increasing pressure. Both people become trapped inside a cycle neither intended to create. Then one day a different realization begins to emerge. The thing the avoidant needed was not endless sacrifice. It was not someone abandoning themselves in the name of love. It was not constant reassurance. It was not relentless pursuit. What they often needed was space. Not emotional distance, not indifference, space to breathe, space to choose, space to move closer voluntarily rather than through pressure. Alongside that space, they needed authenticity. They needed someone who could show up honestly, someone who could express feelings without demands, someone who could maintain boundaries without building walls, someone who could love deeply without turning the relationship into a rescue mission. In that environment, both people remain whole. Both people maintain their identity. Both people continue growing as individuals while building a connection together. And for an avoidant, that kind of relationship feels very different from the relationships that activated fear in the past. It feels lighter, safer, more balanced. It creates room for trust to develop naturally. It creates room for vulnerability to emerge gradually. It creates room for love to grow without requiring either person to lose themselves in the process. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Avoidants do not run from love because they do not care. More often, they run because love feels powerful enough to change their world. The fear has never been connection itself. The fear has been losing independence, losing control, and becoming vulnerable in ways that feel unfamiliar. This is why chasing often creates distance. This is why pressure can trigger withdrawal. And this is why the people who leave the deepest mark on an avoidant are rarely the ones trying hardest to keep them. The people avoidants fall hardest for are the ones who know how to love without losing themselves, the ones who respect their own boundaries, the ones who maintain their identity, the ones who understand that healthy relationships are not built through sacrifice alone, but through mutual respect, emotional safety, and freedom. These people do not force connection. They allow it to grow naturally. They do not demand trust. They create an environment where trust can develop on its own. And perhaps that is the lesson many people need to hear today. Your value does not increase when you chase harder. Your worth does not depend on someone's ability to recognize it. Real love should never require you to abandon yourself just to be chosen. The strongest connections happen when two whole people come together, not when one person disappears to keep the relationship alive. The person an avoidant falls hardest for is not the one who sacrifices their identity in the name of love. It is the one who remains whole, the one who can care deeply while still respecting themselves, the one who can offer closeness without control, affection without pressure, and love without losing their own sense of self. Because when an avoidant finally meets someone who offers connection without control, understanding without pressure, and love without demands, something remarkable happens. For the first time, they stop feeling like they have to protect themselves from the relationship. Their walls begin to lower, their fears begin to quiet. And love stops feeling like a trap. It starts feeling like home. If this video gave you a new perspective on avoidance in relationships, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep psychological insights and relationship truths. Also, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. And before you go, leave a comment below with one word that describes your experience with avoidance. Your story may help someone else feel less alone. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.